Okay, I'm just going to quickly go through. A lot of people said I'm a little bit confused by the template, and there was one little bit of CSS I want to go through a little bit more detail on. The first thing is we've done our home page, right? This is our menu, slider, center content, and footer. Now you do this step before you do this center content. Once you make sure that your header looks exactly how you want it, and your footer looks exactly like you want it. If you're not there yet, keep getting there, then do this step. Okay, and I would do this step before I start in here. And all it was, we want to make, for this assignment, a home page and a contact page. Alright? So we want to make the contact page and we want it to link from here. So if I click here, you'll see we go to the contact page, and contact page is now highlighted. It's now the active tag on that page. Okay, we go back to home, and you'll notice at the moment there's nothing in my contact page. Ideally, probably some of this footer stuff will actually go in that. I don't think you need to have, when you do your design, I wouldn't have the map in the footer. That actually, I just showed that to be on the contact page. And I did that by doing, all I did in the, where am I? So I had my original index page, look at that. And I'll open this in. So all I did was get rid of where we had the slider and the products. I changed that to content. So that would be whatever content is going to go on that page. So if you're making, say, a page about us, the classic website about the company, you would call that about us, right? And you would put all your content there. And all is here is, up here is the navigation, and down here is the footer, okay? And as I said, you save that as a template file, and then when you're ready to make it into a page, I will make this contact. I would then, up in the menu, find where home was, and home would have had an active here. Actually, let me find contact. So it has this active flag here that we'd already moved down in contact. That we'd take it off home and move it down to contact, and that's what makes that link in the menu highlight. Okay, and that template then, technically as a web designer, you can make lots and lots of pages off that. Okay, that becomes your template to make it. But there's no point doing that until your header and footer is correct. It's how you exactly want to look. Otherwise, you'll end up. The problem is, let's say you make a 10-page website, and you didn't get your footer right, you had errors in it. You then have to go change that 10 times. Does that make sense? So that's why you get it right, and then you can create as many pages off once. Actually, web designers use what's called content management systems that do that for you. But at this level of web design, that's really, and you would occasionally do static pages like this as a web designer. Does anyone have any questions on the making the template? Does that make sense? I think quite a few people were confused.
How do you make it?
So all I did was save as. So from my index, I started my index. I've found and this is where your comments are really, really helpful. I found where my slider started, and I selected that. And then I found where my product container started, and I selected that till the end. There was a fair bit there. End of the product, and I literally go delete. As simple as that. I can then create a new content container here and close it off. So I've just got that. You actually could just leave a bunch of white space, and you know that's where you have to create new containers or new container fluids depending on what website's going to look like. And I just save that as template. File, save as, and I've already got here as template. Save. Replace, and I now have my template ready to go. Does that make sense? So it's just a case of saving them. Then when I want to make the contact page, I open up my template, because you don't want to be constantly touching your index. Once you'll now, from this point forward, you'll go through be adding lots of content inside your index, so you don't want to be stuffing around with that. So you'd have your template. I'm going to make a contact page, so I'd open up my template. I'll go File, Save As, and I would save that as my contact page, and then change that to add my contact content in. Does that make sense? Cool. Okay, the next thing I most of you just do what I'm going to show you with these buttons. I can tell you now, after years and years of web design, whenever I come to transform translate, I still check the book. It is one of the most understanding padding margins. This is quite difficult to understand. It's really, really difficult. So honestly, I just usually it's a recipe, and I'm going to try a little bit to explain it because I did it too briefly yesterday, and I just fudged it with a 25%, which wasn't really responsive. So what we had yesterday in the index. So this is what you should have. It's perfectly centered, and if I go into my developer tools, the button is always centered. Okay, it's correctly centered. And I did that through a couple of pieces of CSS. So for most of you, just follow, because it's what I do. Okay. First of all, the container. The button needs to be position absolute, and by default, the container it's in is actually already relative. And what that means is the pbox div will be relative to where it is on the page. Does that make sense? So if it's there, whatever's before it, it's relative to what comes before it. So it's in the flow of the page. Absolute says, I'm going to tell you where you're going to be. You have to be. I don't care which order you are in the page. So, and to put that in perspective, in the let's open up the index. If we look at these buttons, they're actually after the image. So if they were relative, the button will be below the image. But because they're absolute, they're on the, they're inside the image. They're on the same. Okay, so I can tell it where to be. The next thing we need is the Z indexes. So the image is -1, the button is 2, and that just means the button will always be on top. You know, sometimes you usually don't need this, but it's definitely worth doing as a backup. Some browsers might accidentally put it behind. I'm going to move it right 50%, but that 50% is actually based off the bottom left-hand corner of the button. So it basically means the left margin of the button will be halfway through the page. I've actually done it from the bottom, 25%. So in the video I did margin. You can actually do margin. I think margins are very good. It's how I would normally tackle the problem, but I'm also showing how you can do it. If you wanted to center it always into the center of the image, you do 50%. And that means that button will always be centered into the image. So I'll show you that in a second. Let me get rid of this before I do that, so that you'll actually see that. Delete. Yes. So at the moment, you'll see now it's the bottom right hand corner. That is actually in the center of the image. Does that make sense? So we've used absolute to tell you where you're going to be, and you're going to be up 50%. You're going to be 50% up the page from the bottom, and right 50%. Does that make sense? But the button's not in the center, is it? It's a bit weird. So we now need to use this little piece of trick, which is called transform translate. So the transform is basically effectively a method of CSS, and translate just needs to move it. And we're actually going to move it 50% of itself. So we're going to move it. This is the X coordinate, and this is the Y coordinate, and we're moving it 50% of itself in the X and Y coordinates. So I control that. It is now centered. Does that make sense? So basically what it did is it moved 50% of the size of the object down and right. Okay? So again, for most of you, just understand you can do this stuff with CSS. There's also some animations. You can actually animate stuff with CSS. So over time you'll learn this. So don't stress too much. As I said, you are constantly looking up. As a web designer, I'm always looking at the best methods to do things. Okay? So if something you want to do something, look it up. Don't be stressed. CSS is quite complicated, and the way it works, I've made it look very simple for you here. But I can tell you web designers spend half their life pulling their hair out over it, getting it to work perfectly and work perfectly on all devices, because even some CSS doesn't work on all devices the same way. So all different browsers handle CSS slightly different, which can get really, really frustrating. Cool. And also what I've added for those that want an extension, so actually let me just end this now.